I was trying to express. I don't know. I'm suddenly stressed. This is gonna be a tough video, I can already tell. Hey guys, it's Stella here and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, of course, welcome to my channel. The reason why I want to film this video is, first of all, when I was an IB student, I was searching for these videos and I realized there weren't many videos about this online. And the second reason is because this is kind of like one of the first few portfolios that I did. Since I'm doing design in the future, I want to kind of look back on my first portfolio and kind of see how I grew and what I did as a beginner sort of art student. The first few things I'm going to talk about is kind of a summary of IB art and my conclusions after the 2 years and what I recommend. Just a short part, and then I'm gonna start introducing my process portfolio. Please keep watching if you're interested, but I'll make timestamps maybe, and then you can just skip to the part where you want to watch. IB art is a lot more writing than you guys would think, because compared to, I think, A-levels, IB art is more focused on kind of the process and writing. At the same time, IB art is more inclusive. As compared to A-levels, they don't focus as much on skills, like drawing skills especially. And honestly, everyone's portfolios and themes are gonna be different, so the only tip that I recommend that will not get you wrong anywhere is just following the marking criteria at all times. This is so important. I will also emphasize a lot on this throughout my portfolio. Like, this is the marking criteria and these are the factors you have to follow when you're kind of working on your portfolio, and that's also what makes it different from other portfolios. My works gravitate towards fine art, so if you're a fine art student or you're interested in that area, this video is gonna help you more than anything else. My overall theme, I can't really summarize it in one word, but it's kind of exploring, documenting my experiences as a Chinese immigrant in Europe. Yeah, a lot of my works are based on celebrating heritage, celebrating my culture and my identity and stuff like that. I have my laptop with me, so let's get started. As you guys can tell from the first few slides, at least the first slide, there isn't really much of a theme going on. It's just a starting point, exploring compositions and experimenting with compositions. At this time, I was still pretty much clueless. I was just doing what I knew how to do, which was like still life and still life and still life. But as you guys can tell, even if you're clueless, you can still squeeze in some criteria. For instance, in the second slide, I featured an artist. I featured Morandi for my still life because he's also a still life artist. And this slide is where I start to experiment with different techniques. And this one I did was blind contour, where you like poke a pencil through a paper and you just draw without looking. For instance, this was skills, techniques, and processes. Throughout these slides, I didn't have much of ideas and intentions, but there's still some refining and reflecting. Still pretty much just figuring my life out. Continuing with some experimenting, this slide is where I show some experimenting with composition as I arranged different random objects and took photos of them. This is also kind of experimenting with photography and still experimenting with composition. So the first few slides, as you guys can tell, I wasn't really exploring a really huge theme. Like, my pieces were really strong in technique, but there weren't meaning behind it as they were just still life. So that's why I think IB focuses way more on meaning and intention. In the next few slides, you can see how I turned my still life pieces into a more conceptual art piece. And yeah, this is where I also start to kind of dive into my theme of exploring my identity and my culture. So this slide is questioning how art is assessed in China and how art is assessed in Western education systems, and I kind of compare the marking system in China and for the IB. In the next slide, I start to also kind of self-assess my works. As you guys can tell from a screenshot of my art journal, I started marking myself. This is a final piece, by the way. It's this pile of drawings that I did placed in a corner, and it's called Questioning What Art Can Be. The fun part is that I turned these still life pieces into a conceptual art. This is also where I had some critical investigation. I started exploring the art movement of conceptual art. I featured artists like Duchamp because he's obviously one of the most famous artists in conceptual art. He turned a urinal into a fountain, and similarly I turned my older still life drawing pieces into a piece of conceptual art by questioning what art can be and questioning how we assess art. And moving to the next slide is a mind map. This is where my theme of exploring my culture identity really began, and it's also where I start to really take off as a fine art student, I think. The next few slides will be dedicated to my piece called Unravel. So I started with some background research, and since the IB focuses a lot on processes, I decided to interview 3 generations in my family to the same questions. For instance, what was their first job, to kind of see how values shifted through the generation. Here I have my reflection where I talked about how it was really fun to talk to different generations of my family, and this also allowed me to connect more with my family, know more about my heritage and my family history. For critical investigation, I featured an artist which also had like a similar upbringing as me, and how the meaning in her works inspired my work. And next is more conceptual analysis and just having some keywords that related to this piece, which was root and path, because this piece resembles theirs, and how it represents social mobility and how open and closed, because unravel is essentially how I kind of unravel myself and open up myself to talk to others about my family history. And on the right side of this slide, I have another mind map. I think mind maps helps you guys a lot in your IB portfolios because you can just come up with different ideas. I explored the symbol of red in China and worldwide. So in the next slide, I have another screenshot from my art journal, which is where I kind of design how my final piece is going to be displayed. And then I featured an artist that also employs one-line drawings, which is obviously Picasso and his bull drawings. I kind of justified my choice and decision, or outlined my inspiration behind my drawing technique, which is really key when you're doing your portfolio. Just justify any decision you have. I decided to use continuous line drawing because I want to show unity and I want to show this bond. Moving to the next slide, which is a picture of my final outcome using continuous line drawing and sewing and this kind of display, which was really cool. I had a lot of fun with this piece, and it's definitely also an eye-catching piece in my exhibition. For my choices of technique, I then featured another artist which uses sewing. Please justify any mediums that you use, any technique, your meaning behind it, just explain everything. That's why there's so much writing. It's just a lot of explain. And then this is the beginning of my next piece, which was called Culture Erosion. The foundation of my piece was family portraits. At this point, my strongest technique is still just drawing. That's why I decided to draw a series of family portraits. I kind of explained my starting point, and then I outlined my inspiration, which was the Chinese knot. It also represents unity and also represents happiness and stuff like that. And the next page, what result I achieved using different mediums. And then finally I chose, it was ink. I said it represented blood. That relates to family and DNA and family relations, blah blah, yada yada yada. And also before every one of my pieces, I like to plan out and kind of design how my final outcome is gonna look like. So there's a brief kind of planning I had there, just a small planning. The next page is the final outcome. With the fundamental meaning behind this piece is just pretty much showing how when I moved abroad, my values changed a little bit. I used burning. I thought it represented decay and erosion of my culture. So yeah, each small decision has a meaning behind it. That's the thing you have to include in your portfolio more than anything else. I then further added an artist that also uses burning in his works. So it goes like this. I began with a series of family portraits, but then I branched out into 2 different outcomes. It kind of shows how you can use the same thing to explore. Basically, for my second outcome, I produced a video from Final Cut Pro. Actually, I began with printing on tracing paper and overlapping these portraits, and then I used that idea but digitally in Final Cut. It really shows how you stepped out from your comfort zone. And in the end, this was a projection in my exhibition and it looked really cool. And in the next slide, I kind of analyzed my meaning behind this piece, and also I added a critical investigation of an artist that also uses video and cinematography. I added portraits of my grandparents, my parents, and me. In his piece, similarly, he explores the concept of birth, living, and death. So I guess we both explore that circle of life. The next slide is the beginning of a new art project called Lost and Found. I chose Lost and Found because again it describes my cultural identity as an immigrant. This further inspired me to use Lost and Found tags, and I also featured an artist which is an also immigrant artist that had similar values in her piece as I did. Next is just me experimenting with positioning. So I first had my initial idea, which I sketched onto my journal. It's a really bad drawing, but hey, I think it works. I thought my uniform represented international mindedness and how that kind of embodied cultural diversity. Moving on to the next slide is my iconic self-portrait. This is my first self-portrait painting, and I would say it was definitely a journey, but overall I am super proud with my final result because it was my first time painting people. Before, I only knew how to paint veggies and fruits. The most challenging part of this was because I was not familiar with painting people at all, and I had to teach myself how to mix skin tones, and I wrote that in my reflection how that was really challenging for me. That's the kind of thing you talk about. Many people like this piece because they thought I did quite a good job, and I am proud of it too, but yeah, it's kind of embarrassing to show yourself in your exhibition. But yeah, a lot of people loved it, so Am I complaining? No. The next slide, and it's the final slide, is where quite embarrassing to show my face here, but it's realistic and that's what matters. This painting is called Labels. I kind of want to show how I was labeled by people because I was different. I don't know what I was trying to express. It's based on the labeling theory in psychology or in sociology that I learned in like a few years back. I thought that was pretty interesting, and this kind of shows how not only you were inspired by your experiences, but how you kind of took ideas from different subjects. I think they really like that as well because it's how do you call it, multidisciplinary. And I also used an artist, a painter called Lucian Freud, for my piece because essentially my technique was inspired by him. For this project I had all the criterias. I just like to keep scoring and keep writing to fulfill these components, and yeah, they just can't prove you wrong on that. That wraps up my portfolio. Please comment down below any questions. This video is just a cluster of ideas. I'm sure I didn't answer most of your doubts, so if you have any doubts, please comment your questions down below and I'll make sure to answer them. And yeah, if you also want me to do a video on my comparative study, please comment down below. I'll maybe do one if requested. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a like and share it with some of your friends if they need help. Until next time, love from Stella.